Up next on Inside the SCCA, getting ready for the VIR Super Tour. Oh, shoot. Welcome to episode 219, maybe 220, something in the 220-ish range of Inside the SCCA, presented by RaceSchool.com. I'm Brian Bielanski. Got a great episode for us today. Sitting down with a former national champion. Are you always a former national champion, or are you just a national champion from a different year? I don't know how that works. I'm not good with that, the semantics of that. My guest, Rob Hines. Hey, Rob, how are you?
Good. And to answer your question, you can actually be the reigning national champion if you won it the last year. So you're either a former national champion or the reigning national champion.
I got it. So 1999 T2 national champion. We're going to get to all that in a moment. I am unclear, Rob. You and I have known each other for a long time. Back when I was hanging out at Summit a while back as we first met each other. Didn't hang out much, but I know who you were. We saw each other in the paddock. We've talked a little bit over the years. I'm not sure why it's taken 5 years for you to be on my show. I think that's probably more my scheduling problem than yours. But I'm happy you're here, nonetheless. Our final episode in Studio Sierra Madre. We'll be moving just down the street about 25 minutes from here next week. So we've got a bunch of shows we're putting in the can, as I like to say, so that I can move without having to worry about having any kind of marital problems with my wife. And I can be fully focused on that. And I also have a race at Willow Springs this weekend. We're going to be remote from Road Atlanta next weekend. Got to get all that done. It's crazy times. But Rob, you get to, since it's your first time on the show, you get the first time on the show question. We've asked every first-time guest this question over the years. So here it comes. How did you get mixed up in this crazy sport that we all love?
Well, it started at a pretty early age for me. So you mentioned Summit Point. We ran into each other there periodically. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, and that was our local track. And so my dad raced a variety of different cars. He raced showroom stock back in the old days with an Opel. Mm-hmm. He raced a B sedan Mazda RX-3 that became a GT2 Mazda RX-3, then a GT3 Mazda RX-3. He had a Sports 2000. He had a couple Toyotas, a GT4 Toyota, GT5 Toyota. And so I used to go to the track to help my dad. And as a kid, I remember spending a lot of time there. I learned how to drive there when I was about 9 years old. I think that was legal in the paddock. I'm not sure. Maybe not anymore. But
shh. It's just you and me talking. Nobody's watching.
Okay, well, that's good. So it was actually great. I got to, one of our crew guys would lend me his keys to his Pinto, and he would just say, "Don't hit anything," and off I would go. So anyway, really great experiences. I met a lot of people, some of whom I still see today, and it really does feel like a family. And so growing up at the track, helping my dad, the only thing I wanted to do when I got older was drive race cars. And so I'm lucky I get to live my dream here with the SCCA and, with some other sanctioning bodies as well. But it's been, kind of something I've been looking forward to my entire life growing up. And then I got to do it when I got older and got a job.
That's great. That's great. Who is dad?
My dad was Bob Hines.
Okay.
So he was a local racer.
Yep.
He was a steward before that at Marlboro, which is the predecessor track in the DC area before Summit Point. Marlboro, I think, closed in 1970 before I was born, somewhere around there. And then Summit Point opened right around the same time. So he got involved when he was in college. He actually raced midgets when he was in college, which was pretty dangerous from what I understand back then. This was in the 50s where cars they didn't have any roll bars or roll cages or anything like that. And he got out of it because of the safety aspects, and then he kind of discovered sports car racing and got hooked on that.
That is so ironic. Our paths are so similar. My dad, and when you say midgets, you're not talking about Austin Healey midgets or MG midgets. You're talking about midgets like circle track, pavement, maybe dirt midgets.
Dirt midgets in his case, yeah.
So my dad started in the SCCA back in the 60s. He did some H production Sprite stuff, and then he went midget racing. And right after I was born, he ended up upside down and on fire in a midget. And my grandfather, who took my dad to the Indy 500 several years and couldn't understand why dad wanted to be a race car driver. Crazy how that works. But I was just a little thing, and my dad said, maybe this isn't the right thing to be doing now that I have a family, and quit, basically cold turkey. And then back in 86, he decided that, well, long story short, doctor said you need a hobby, expected for him to come back with stamp collecting or tiddlywinks or something. And dad rolled into the doctor's office with an SCCA physical form. And the doc said, well, I'm not quite sure this is what I had in mind, but if this will help you relax, then sounds good to me. And I was 16 at the time. So that's how I got into it, through my dad. So we could both blame our pops for this crazy thing that we love to do. So so when did you finally start actually doing some competition on the motorsport side of things?
So I got my license in 1995.
Okay.
So I did the SCCA driver schools, and the way that worked back then is you had to do two driver
Yep.
schools to get your license. And I was in grad school. So a little funny story. I have a master's degree in computer science, and I attended school on a fellow research fellowship and scholarship. And so I saved my money when I was in grad school so that I could afford to get my competition license. And so that actually ended up paying for not only my competition license, but also my first race car. So that was, I don't know, a lot of people in racing, they have to figure out different creative ways how to
Yep.
get into it. And that was mine.
Yeah, my path was my two driver schools were graduation gifts for high school.
Oh, perfect.
And then there was no money. So I didn't get a chance to go back to doing anything until I got to working for CNN in Atlanta. I just made enough money to be able to buy a used Honda Civic, which we threw a cage in, and that became an ITC car at the time. And did a couple of years of racing with that, and then I bought a Formula V, and I was a very, very tight fit in a Formula V. Then we decided to get into, I had a family, so I kind of did the same thing as my dad did. I kind of put it all aside for a while. I worked and flagged the whole time, but I stopped driving for a while. So very cool. So 95, you got your license. You were the 1999 national champion in T2, so you progressed really quickly.
Yeah, I started racing. So I got my license in 95 in the spring. My first race was right after I graduated. It was June of 95, and I bought an ITA Mazda RX-3.
Sure.
Back in the days when IT was where it was at, there was no Spec Miata.
Right.
A lot of the classes that are really popular now, no MX-5 classes. It was showroom stock racing, and it was IT racing, and I couldn't quite afford a showroom stock car, so I bought an IT car.
Right.
And we had fields at Summit Point, sometimes 40, 50 cars.
Oh, yeah.
In the class, so it was hyper competitive, and I raced that for, I guess, about 2.5 years or so. And then I moved up to an ITS RX-7, which was a great race car. I loved that car. It was actually the first race car I had that handled very well. So that was kind of nice. And then I wanted to go national racing. And so this is the predecessor to the majors that many people know today. And so I was trying to figure out a cost-effective way to do that. And I ended up buying a Camaro, a T2 Camaro from a guy named Tom Oates. Great guy.
Yeah.
It was built by Tom and Joe Aquilani at Phoenix Performance. So they're still around. And my dad loaned me the money for that. And so we decided we'd go national racing in 1998.
Very cool. So IT back in the day, for those who might not be old enough to remember, basically showroom stock cars had a 6-year lifespan. And when they were done, they were done. There was no place for them to go. They didn't put those cars into production classes until much, much later. And so there was this glut of 6-year-old cars and no place to race them. So the initial idea was that would be a place for the showroom stock cars to go and race IT. And then in addition to that, there are a whole bunch of used cars of that same ilk that were dirt cheap. And you could pick them up for a couple $1,000 and then go and build an IT car straight up. And so, yeah, IT was so popular in the late 80s, early 90s, and throughout the whole 90s. In some areas, still kind of popular, but in other areas, it's almost non-existent these days.
Yeah, so it really is something that's kind of changed. And I think that's the way that racing is. It changes with the times. And you see it on classes become more popular or less popular. You see it with some of the sanctioning bodies. A lot of the sanctioned bodies that are fairly popular out there, they've been born in the last 10 or 15 years. And, I think, it's up to all of the sanctioning bodies that have been around to kind of evolve over time and to find their niche. And it's just the way of the world.
You summed up the entire last year of SCCA life there in one very, very elegant sentence. It's just the changing times of motorsports, and I don't want to get into a deep discussion about the class consolidations because we've done a lot of that. But it's exactly what happens. We used to have, A sedan and B sedan, and I mean I can give you, if you look at the back of the run of the GCR, or if you look at the Runoffs program, you're going to see buckets of classes that don't exist anymore. And it's just the evolution of what the sport is that causes that. And it's interesting for that. So T2, a Camaro, that thing must have been a beast. Obviously it was fast because you won a national championship with it. Tell us about that car.
Yeah, it was fast. It was a LT1 Camaro. So it was it the fourth gen? I can never quite remember. I think it was the fourth gen of Camaro and Firebird. It went like stink in a straight line.
Yep.
Didn't stop very well. And the touring rules of the time, you couldn't modify the springs or the sway bars. So it was kind of like a showroom stock plus car at that point. One of the things that was really great about touring, and I think one of the reasons they went there, is because the cars were getting too fast for the cage design at the time. And so touring allowed you to do a much better cage design, make the car a lot safer. But it was a fun car to drive. It was, hold on tight, slide around, and hope the thing stops at the end of the straightaway.
Yeah. We're going to dig a little deep into touring here in just a few minutes. It's the one kind of category of classing that we haven't talked much about here over the years. And since I've got you here and you're knee deep in that touring world, we're gonna talk about that some. But before we get to that, there's a long time between 1999 and 2025. You've got some pro racing experience. You are a member of the Road Racing Drivers Club, which is like the coolest thing in the world. What was that like? You're a Kimberly Cup Award winner, and then you became a member of the Road Racing. It's the Road Racing Drivers Club, right?
Yes, the Road Racing Drivers Club, or people call it the RRDC because the Road Racing Drivers Club is a mouthful.
A bit, yeah. The list of names I always like to scroll through that whenever I get an RRDC member on the show. The list of names who are members of the RRDC is the absolute who's who of road racing in North America. It is crazy, the people on that list. If you can think of any top driver of the last 50, 40 years and beyond, they're on the list. So when you look at that list and see Robert Hines on it, how's that?
Well, there's kind of two feelings. One is I'm not sure exactly how I got in, but that's the first thing. But it's a pretty amazing thing. I don't feel like I'm worthy of a lot of the drivers on there. You see drivers who are, SCCA national champions 10 plus times, like John Heinrichsey and Jerry Hansen going back many years. People probably haven't heard of Jerry Hansen, but
I'm from the Midwest. I know Jerry Hansen well.
Yeah, and then you look at some of the pro drivers out there, like Dario Franchitti, and I could just go on and on.
Yep.
So I'm not sure how I snuck in the back door, but I'm kind of glad I'm there, and it's pretty cool.
What's cool to me about the RRDC is that it shows the way that the motorsports world in the United States views the Sports Car Club of America. There are, I didn't do the count, but I'm guessing there's probably 15, 20 SCCA drivers, maybe even more. I should count it up one day. But there's a ton on there, all the way back to Mark Donohue, who, was, in my opinion, maybe the best SCCA race car driver of all time. But yeah, the list is so long of SCCA members, and we think of ourselves as, amateur racers, or we do our thing. But what we do in outside, when you talk to the IMSA, the IndyCar, they know exactly what we do, and they're very aware of the skill and the talent of the people that the SCCA has running our races.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think that talent is not just the drivers. If you look at professional officials, not all of them, but most of them have come from or come through the SCCA. So that's really where you start to see the officials grow up, and they cut their teeth. And, you can think about people like Dennis Dean and others who are involved with the FIA at the highest levels of the sport, who grew up, Dennis started as an SCCA tech inspector and then became a steward. And there are, many other examples like that. Steve Pence here locally in the DC area is another one. So, the SCCA has had an outsized influence on motorsports, not just from a driving perspective, but from an officiating perspective, and in many other ways too.
Dennis Dean was the first one that came to mind, and he has been mentoring, fostering a number of young stewards. Dave Sue is one that comes to mind. He's from your area, and getting those folks opportunities. Sidney Yeagle is working with the FIA and all of that, and she's now one of the new administrators for SCCA road racing now that Jeff Barrow has left. So yeah, there's a lot of connections, and our folks wouldn't get those opportunities if what we do wasn't well respected,
Yeah, so it's true. And back, in the early days, a lot of the pro drivers came from the club.
Yep.
Nowadays, maybe not as much, but some of them will come through the club. They'll run club events. They'll do a variety of things. It's not necessarily well publicized, but the club plays a very, very important role.
It's funny. Back when you and I started, it was pretty prevalent. It happened rather frequently. Michael Andretti, Alan Sir Jr. all came up through Formula Super V at the time, and a lot of guys came up through Formula Atlantic, which became the Atlantic Pro Series. And then it kind of fell off, where there wasn't a lot of SCCA drivers making that leap into either IMSA or IndyCar. That said, in the last 3-4 years, it feels like the tide has turned a little bit, and now we've got a fair number of young drivers who are getting opportunities, and I think that's fantastic that that tide has turned a bit.
Yeah, I agree. And I will say, I think Mazda gets a lot of credit.
Yep.
They've built a great feeder system. They've put a lot of support into the SCCA, but into the racers. And, you look at what's happened with Spec Miata and now Spec MX5 into the global MX5 series. They have brought a lot of people up over the last probably 15 years, but especially, like you said, the last 3 to 4 years. So not to say that other manufacturers like Nissan and others aren't involved. They certainly are. But Mazda has really kind of solidified that ladder that existed many years ago.
Definitely. Definitely. Give me a second. I'm going to thank our sponsors real quick, and then I'm going to come right back, and we'll continue our chat here with Rob Hines. Real quick, just want to thank the folks that help us do this. Of course, it's Inside the SCCA, brought to you by RaceSchool.com. Race School is out here, and in California, most of their stuff is out at Buttonwillow now, but I think they still do a little bit at Willow Springs. You can get your SCCA full competition license if you pass the school. Got to pass the school. Also have defensive driving courses, high-performance driving days. Check them out, definitely, raceschool.com. Solar Performance Specialties, they are the folks that handle and help a whole bunch of autocrossers throughout the United States. They're at a lot of the national tour events. They're always at the Solo Nationals. They'll even help a very slow autocrosser like I am, and we love working with them as well. Ray Esports is the official sim racing league of Inside the SCCA. We love racing with Stevie Ray and his folks. A lot of SCCA racers in his group, and we tend to treat the sim racing like there's actually consequences if you hit someone, and I think that's a real positive when you get a group that will actually drive that way. And then finally, David Pinterick, GT1 Spec MX5 driver, one of our own. He is the principal of William R. Pinterick and Associates. They do financial planning, and I don't know, that's one thing I'm not very good at, so you got to have some advice on that. If you're looking for help, give David Pinterick a call, and we appreciate all of what he does for us as well. So, back here with Rob Hines talking about, we're going to get to VIR. We're talking a little bit about the Touring 3 class and the touring classes in general here. Real quick, before we get to that, you've done some pro racing. Tell us about that journey. It's hard to be a professional race car driver. Most people don't make their living do it, even if they are professional race car drivers.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm in the category of I've done some pro racing. I'm not a professional.
Right.
I never made my living doing it. I've always made my living in technology.
Right.
But I really appreciate my time. My first taste of it was with the Motorola Cup Series. So back in the day,
Yep.
I got in on the last year of that and ran about 4 or 5 races. Fresh off of my Runoffs win, I got an opportunity to run with a local team that was kind of a low budget team, but we produced some pretty good results, a bunch of top 5s in the GS class, which we were really proud of. I got to compete against people like John Heinrichsey and Stu Hayner and Jean-Francois Dumoulin and a whole variety of other people. So a lot of top names back then. I did a year in World Challenge in touring cars, and this was before the latest incarnation in SRO, racing against guys like Don Salama and Will Turner and Terry McCarthy and a whole variety of other folks. James Safronis, who's still involved in that in the SRO. So it was a really, really big fields and a lot of fun. And so then I kind of stepped back from that a little bit and did a bunch more SCCA and some endurance racing. And then I had the opportunity to go back and do a season with Tech Sport and SRO in touring cars in 2021, which was a great experience.
Cool. And none of that really happens without your SCCA experience, right?
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, first of all, there's the learning that I went through in SCCA. And so that all started when I was a kid helping my dad at the track, understanding, how the weekends went and how do you take care of a race car, but then actually learning how to drive through the driver schools and then racing in the SCCA provided kind of the experience. But then it was also the platform to get to a position where, I got these rides.
Right.
And so I think it helped in many different dimensions.
Definitely. All right, let's talk touring classes, because now there's actually some guys actually working on a touring car class that's pulling old World Challenge cars that are still great and usable, especially out here. And I'm wondering how much that might catch on in other parts of the country. But touring classes here, they are as close to what used to be showroom stock as we have, right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I was mentioning earlier, those were the roots. Touring cars started with some of the faster cars where they were basically needed to upgrade the safety equipment, the cages. The cars were going too fast for the old bolt-in style cages
Right.
that you had to have. And the seat used to be that you had to keep the stock passenger seat. And, it was state of the art for then, but times had changed.
Right.
And so then you had touring and showroom stock. And showroom stock, they were completely stock, and then they started to have what they called the trunk kits.
Right.
And the trunk kits were simple add-on things like shock absorbers, springs, sway
Right.
bars, and then eventually that all kind of migrated and evolved into the touring classes that we have today.
Right. We used to have showroom stock GT, showroom stock A, B, and C. GT kind of became touring 1, right?
Yeah, so when it first started, it became Touring 1, but then that whole class got moved to Touring 2.
Right.
Then Touring 1, a new Touring 1 came in. This is not something that we've ever seen before in the SCCA, right,
Yes.
Brian?
Of course
A
not.
whole new Touring 1 came in with even faster cars than were in SSGT. So it was comprised mostly of, at the time, Corvettes and
Right.
Vipers. And so that was kind of how it evolved over time.
And then showroom stock GT, showroom stock A went away. We had showroom stock B and C for a while. Those eventually went away. And now we have Touring 1 through Touring 4. And we can get into the evolution of that, because today Touring 1 is a tough sell for some people. It's expensive, and the car numbers in Touring 1 have gone down a bunch. But Touring 2 has seen a resurgence. Lots of Touring 2 cars out there these days. And then you are running now in Touring 3, and then we also have Touring 4. Touring 3 and Touring 4 tend to be some of the better subscribed classes these days.
Yeah, I think it's really a great value in terms of the performance you get for your dollar. Like you mentioned, Touring 1 has become, extraordinarily expensive.
Yeah.
And it's driven because a lot of the newer cars are very difficult to turn into race cars due to some of the security and the electronics.
Right.
It's almost like to be an engineer. So, Touring 1 is a little bit at a crossroads. Will it become the class of the GT4 cars, or will it become a class, that focuses mainly on the old school Touring 1 cars? But the problem is that people don't want to necessarily build a 25-year-old Corvette at this point.
Right.
The world has kind of moved on. And so, like we were talking about earlier, it's kind of the natural evolution as we need to figure out, like, what's the right way to get these really cool cars on the track that are, now extremely fast, extremely fun to drive, extremely reliable and safe.
Right. Well, and we also have all of these cars that are homologated in other organizations. You've got your FIA GT4, the Huracan, and the McLarens that are kind of hanging out in. Well, the Huracan's running in GT1 right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it belongs there or not, but you've got the McLarens who are running in GTX. Those could be Touring 1 cars very easily. It's interesting where the world goes and how the SCCA tries to kind of adapt to it as it comes along. So, are you in the 350 or the 370 in T3?
I'm in the 350.
Okay, so you run a 350Z Nissan. What is when you're, let's talk about the more accessible touring classes from a cost standpoint. That's the Touring 3s and Touring 4s. Is there a lot of development in those cars? Is there a lot of shifting of balance of performance, which makes it more onerous to be able to keep up with? Or are they a pretty solid set of rules at this point?
I think things change over time. I feel like it's a fairly solid rule set, but there's always a little room for improvement. We always learn new things, so I'm constantly developing my car. I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to make it go faster. It definitely goes a lot faster than it did 2 years ago or 3 years ago, due to my effort, the effort of Claude Saffer, who helps me out and is kind of the engineering mind behind, the way we set the car up and what we do to make it better. He's just made a huge difference. So we're always developing, and I suspect my competition is doing the same.
Sure.
So over time, there is that. And the other thing to keep in mind is, there are different philosophies. There's a philosophy where you want to have every car balanced at every track.
Sure.
Then there's a philosophy which is, hey, the Runoffs is going to be at Road America, and there might be a different set of performance characteristics for Road America than for Indianapolis, let's say.
So that's something I see on the socials all the time, that's a detractor for, was just announced a couple of, maybe a month or two ago, that the Runoffs will be going to Road America for a third time. We got the second time this year, and then they're going to go again in 26. And one of the so there's ways to look at that from the club standpoint. It's easier to go back to the same place a couple of times because you know how to do it. The people there are used to us. They know what we need. The first time's kind of the dating period. The second time you're getting ready for the marriage, and then the third time it's the honeymoon. But the problem from a competition standpoint is, if the Runoffs are going to go to a particular track twice, how motivated are you, if you don't have lots of money, to adapt your car for that one venue, when at 2 years it's going to go somewhere else and all those changes you made might be worthless? But when you go a third time, now you can get people who think, okay, we've got three shots at this. Maybe it's worth spending some more money on it. Is that the struggle?
Yeah, I think there are people who would rather see the Runoffs stay in a fixed location for a longer period of time, and then there are other people who want to go and experience a new location,
right,
as frequently as possible, maybe every year or two. And that's personal preference. People have reasons for that. And there's no real right answer. I think from a club business perspective, the club has to look at what happens with numbers as they stay at a certain location. And I think that the trends have been that it falls off over time. My personal opinion, I like staying at a location for a few years because it does let me kind of optimize the car a bit. And you can justify, in some cases you might feel, well, my car doesn't have a shot really at the Runoffs there, but I can justify if it's 3 or 4 or 5 years, maybe I'll buy a different car or try a different.
Well, that's the option too. Right. And then you just have people, which I would love to be in this category, who have unlimited money and or not a lot of money limitations. Nobody has unlimited money. Well, maybe somebody does. But anyway, who can just, it doesn't matter where the Runoffs are at. They're going to make a car, whether it's a one they have or a different one, that will run good at the Runoffs. And that's a nice problem to have.
Yeah, some of those people, they actually bring 2 or 3 cars.
Yep. Somebody did that. Was it, who was it? One of the Mazdas. There was a Mazda RX-7 and a Mazda RX-8. And I think was it Nick Leveroni?
Let's see. I think Mark Cephalo might have.
Oh, it was Mark Cephalo.
He might have had his MX-5.
That's
and
what it
his,
was.
RX-8 with
his
him.
RX-8.
And RX-8 was definitely a better bet this past year for.
And my guess is that they've made some balance of performance on the RX-8 now, which will negate some of those performance positives that he found. So
and for the MX-5 as well. So the SCCA is constantly trying to do a good job, and it's not easy because the good news is we have data that allows us to help support these decisions. But the challenge is, you're optimizing around different drivers and different other factors that are going on. And, it requires quite a bit of thought to really do a good job of optimizing. And you look at some of the Pro Series and they struggle to do it, and they have the same drivers with the same cars prepped by the same people week after week after week. We have different people showing up at different times. So it's a much more challenging job.
Right. Yeah. And there's no way to make everybody happy. Absolutely no way. It's like as a journalist, if I do a story and both sides call and yell at me, I know I've done the job right. It's kind of the same way, you're trying to make that balance. And there are a few jobs in this world that I would absolutely not want to have, and one would be balance of performance for any racing series. Not something I would like to be part of. So if I just want to buy, let's say, a 350Z off my, off of Craigslist or wherever, and I want to go Touring 3 racing, what is the bare minimum just to get it on the racetrack, to get me some track time? What do I have to do to get a Touring 3 car out there?
Yeah, it's pretty simple, actually. It's still, the bare minimum is fairly simple. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to buy some safety equipment.
Yep.
And that's a seat and belts,
Yep.
and of course your own personal safety equipment as well. The cage is very important. In touring, you want to design a very strong cage that helps with the performance of the car, and also keeps you safe, because these cars do go fairly fast.
Yep.
It's part of the appeal of it. And you probably are going to want to use some racing wheels and racing tires and racing brake pads. And I would say that's the minimum to get on the track.
Okay.
You will probably also find yourself very uncompetitive if
Right.
that's all you did. And so you would start to look at things to make yourself more competitive that look like sway bars and shock absorbers and springs. And all the touring classes are slightly different in what they allow.
Sure.
So what's allowed in Touring 4 is a little bit more limited than Touring 1 through 3.
Got it.
You'll look at the shocks. There's a lot in the shock absorbers, a lot of development, and in some cases a lot of money, but it's crucial. You'll tune the car as well, so you can get some power out of these cars. And then
is that an ECU tune, or is there something more extensive?
An ECU tune.
Okay.
Is generally the way that you do it. And many of the cars are also restricted, either flat plate restrictors, or they have turbo inlet restrictors. And so you obviously need to have that per the rules. But those are kind of the basics. Then you can start to look at things that add longevity, like differential coolers, transmission coolers.
Sure.
Most of the cars allow a limited slip differential.
Mm-hmm.
That's an important performance upgrade. But you can get on the track pretty quickly and pretty easily with a minimum of knowledge, assuming you outsource the cage. Like, the rest of it is doable for kind of the average hobbyist.
Yeah.
But then the optimization takes a while.
Right. How long have you had your car?
So I've had this Nissan since, I want to say, 2010.
Okay.
So I've had it for quite a while.
And so let's round it up, 15 years. Are you still developing it to this day?
Every year,
yeah,
we're developing it, and I'm learning stuff during the season. So we are constantly trying new things, new setups, trying to optimize a little here or there. And the rules sometimes change a little bit too, which allow us to do new things. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, they changed some of the rules around the bushing material. So we were stuck with rubber bushings that were the stock bushings, which weren't good from a performance perspective, and they also wore out pretty easily.
Right.
And so we've replaced the bushings with different material in certain places where we're allowed to.
Sure.
And so it's kind of like these little things that you do that are really helpful, and they all eventually add up.
That's the one half of the equation. The other half of the equation is you've got a race car that you've been able to have fun with for 15 years. That's pretty cool. And it's still competitive.
It's pretty unique, and it's pretty cool. And, maybe you look at people like Tom Patton, who I grew up as a kid watching race his Tiger. He's gotten probably a few more miles out of his race car than I have out of mine. But 15 years for a race car is pretty good. It's a good amortization of the investment, that's for sure.
And it's a newer type car. I mean, Tiger Tom's Sunbeam is awesome, but if you're trying to attract a younger generation of racers, I'm gonna guess, especially with like Gran Turismo and all these things, a Nissan 350 is going to be more attractive to the 25-year-olds and younger than a Sunbeam Tiger. So that's what's cool, I think, about the touring class. And then you take it up another step with the Super Touring Light and Super Touring Under, which is the next iteration of being able to develop many of the same race cars. It's a very attainable place to go in motorsports. Understand there's nothing cheap about motorsports. Anybody who says they want to go motorsports on the cheap, they're a little delusional. But there's varying degrees, and the touring classes are a good place to start.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, the good news is there are competitive cars available for sale. And so for $25,000, $30,000 on the low end for a T3, T4 car, you can get your foot in there. It may not win the runoffs. You might need a little more money and development in it, but it's attainable. If you think about what people spent, 20 years ago on race cars, in 1998, I paid $25,000 for my Camaro. Right. I'm pretty certain I could put my Nissan on the track with my own labor, except for the safety equipment, for pretty close to $25,000 or $30,000 getting it on the track, and that's 25 years later. So, racing is expensive. The operating costs have definitely gone up. There's no doubt about that, but buying the car and getting out there is very attainable in the touring classes, which I think is part of the appeal.
Well, and the fact that you can go with a 10-year or 15-year-old car, from a working on it yourself standpoint, the tech that's in your 2010 car and the way it runs is so much different than the tech in a brand new car today. It's, I don't know how much we can actually work on our own cars anymore. And that's what you were talking about with the very expensive T1 cars. There's so much tech in those cars that the average Joe, and without some sort of SAE Master Mechanics certificate, has a hard time working on those cars, where I'm pretty certain, I can take a 10-year-old Nissan, 15-year-old Nissan, and with a little bit of work, I can learn how to make the thing go.
Yeah, the problem really is the electronics. The electronics are all now tied together, all the systems, and it's great. We have cars where we have CarPlay, and you get in and it knows your phone's there, and it's got this big screen, and it shows you how to get there. And in some cases, some of these cars will just drive you there, like some of the electronic vehicles, the electric vehicles. But I think the downside of that is for the hobbyist or somebody who doesn't work for a manufacturer. You can very easily put yourself in a position where the car no longer works because you've done something. And so what that means is that manufacturers are interested in this and interested in racing, and they're starting to develop cars. And you look at Mazda, you look at Toyota with the GR Cup car, look at BMW and all the GT4 cars and the M2 and the 240IR that they've developed. And the list goes on and on. I think that is definitely the future, and the more that SCCA can do to embrace that, the better off we're going to be, because these cars they're not cheap in many cases, but they are out there. And as time goes on, as they time out from their Pro Series, that's where you go, because again, you're stuck with the choice of, do I build this older car with older technology, or do I buy a newer car? But if I buy a newer car off the showroom floor and try to convert it, it's almost impossible.
Yeah. It's hard. Switching gears again, let's talk VIR. You're going to be there in your T3 car. We've had a couple of runoffs there. Super Tour's been going there since, I think, the inception of the Super Tour. What do you like about VIR? What do you not like about VIR?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite tracks. So it's close by. Other than Summit Point, I kind of consider it my home track. I've had many laps there in pro races, in club races. At night, when SCCA used to have the 13-hour endurance race there, in champ car races, excuse me.
Yep.
I've raced there in all kinds of different series, and I think it's one of my favorite layouts in terms of a flowing racetrack, and there's something for everyone. I think one of the challenges with VIR is that the track owners have definitely been trying to improve the track, but I do feel that some of the improvements that they've made have actually limited the safety with some of the places the walls have been put. And it's one of those tracks where, you look at it and it's just like, oh, it's like a golf course. There's green grass everywhere. What could possibly go wrong? But you go off in some of these places and, there's a hill and you're just continue on down the hill. Next thing you're in a wall. And I think again the track has probably been doing their best working with the FIA to try to bring it up to and continue to maintain the standards. But some of those runoff areas that you used to go off and you'd spin the car and drive back on the track, now you're actually running into a wall. And I think that's the one thing I don't really like that much about it.
Yeah. Some of those changes I think were to accommodate other types of racing, motorcycles, maybe. There's we could do a whole podcast about the changes at VIR and the relationship between the club and the track and all of that. It's been fairly widely publicized with some of that. What's key to a quick lap at VIR?
Yeah, I think it's really about maintaining your momentum. There's some nice long straightaways, but there are some very challenging corners that lead onto those straightaways, and it's really all about driving up that momentum. You go through turn one, you've got to roll a tremendous amount of speed, but balance that with not getting out too far to the exit. So it's really kind of making sure the speed rolls, but you don't get out there where you can't put the power down. Rolling speed through turn three, NASCAR bend. The next turn, left hook, you've got to make sure it's an extremely late apex so you can set yourself up for the maximum launch through the lower S's. And then have a car set up that's allows you to carry the speed through the upper S's. Then you come to South Bend, and it's a very fast, intimidating left-hander that you can't see around. And so you got to have a way to get that speed through there. And then through Oak Tree, maximize your exit, give up a little bit on the entry to the corner so you can get down the straightaway. Then you get to the backside of the track. You've got the roller coaster at the top of the hill. You're changing directions, you're braking, you're accelerating. And then I think what is one of the most challenging corners in North American road racing is Hog Pen, leading up the front straightaway. And for those of you who've been there, you're coming down a little short chute. You're turning the car to the left, going over a curb, getting some air, and you're braking. And you're then bending the car back to the right, going downhill that entire time, so the platform is unstable, and then you're getting back on the gas. And there's so much going on with the car, with the inputs you have to put into it and the terrain. To me, it's like one of the most rewarding corners to get right.
Yeah. Setting up of a race car on a road course is always a compromise, and a lot of tracks have, besides their distinct straightaways, lengths, and all of that kind of stuff, they have maybe two types of corner sections, and you're compromising between making those two sections work. At VIR, I think there's like four distinct. You could set your car up four different ways for four different sets of corners, and you'd get one of those four corners right, but the other three would suck. And finding the right compromise at VIR, I get the impression from everyone I've talked to, is the magic sauce, because there's two or three spots, or maybe even four, that you really want to try to go fast at, but you can't set up the car to go fast on all four of those.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think it rewards people who are able to set up their car very well, but then also drive, I'll call them problems, but your setup is going to create problems in some of those corners, right, and you have to be able to drive around those problems. And most of the time, I could set up my car so that it doesn't push in turn one, but that would cause it to be loose in a lot of other places that are important. So I've got to figure out, how do I cope with that push in turn one and roll the speed there so the car is planted in other places.
Right. It's always a dance, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's what makes it fun.
Yeah. What is your what are your thoughts on the field in going into VR? Have you taken a look at the entry list yet?
Yeah, I took a look at the entry list. We've got some good players coming. I think last time I looked, there were maybe 8 or 10 people in T3. So I think that's not a bad field. It's not the Runoffs with 30 people, but right. I think it'll be a pretty interesting, good race, good mixture of cars. So I think it'll be a fun time.
Are you planning to run for another national championship this year?
I'm going to try.
Yeah.
My plan is to go to the Runoffs. I'll probably take both the Spec Miata and the T3 car to the Runoffs, taking both cars down to VIR. And I'm going to give it a shot. It's been a while though.
last question before I get to the get to the part of the show where you get to thank all the folks that help you make it happen.
Yeah.
A lot of people double dip. You know, they'll race in two classes so they can get double the track time and all that kind of stuff. Most, though, double dip in cars that are more alike than the 350Z and the Spec Miata. First of all, why not stay in one family or the other? And then second of all, how hard is it to make the transition between the Miata and the 350Z?
Yeah, so for me, I got into Spec Miata racing in 2012, I think, 2012, 2013, something like that. Been doing it a little over 10 years. And the reason I got into it is I watched all of these folks out there having a great time on the track. They were racing very close to each other, and it was highly competitive, big fields. Kind of reminded me of what I got started in. And touring, I would say there's been a resurgence in the past few years, but back then it had kind of dropped off a little bit. And so I was looking for the competition, and that's what led me to Spec Miata. And frankly, it was Tom Fowler from OPM, who recently has unfortunately closed up shop, but he put me in a car and said, I never thought I'd fit in a Miata. I'm 6'5", and he said, well, I think you'll fit. And I sat in the car, and it worked out. And so, the next year I bought myself a Miata, and I started running that, and I have had a lot of fun, a lot of really great races over the years. To me, the types of cars, they're different. With the Miata, you've got to even focus more on rolling speed, and the whole strategy of a Miata race is fascinating. It's nothing like a touring race. The bump drafting, the pushing, when are you going to pop, all of that stuff. So it's kind of taken my racecraft to another level. I think that's in my driving, so it's been really good for me. But switching between the cars is really no problem at all. And I think that's because, throughout my career, I've driven a lot of different cars. I've driven cars with, 400, 500 horsepower. I've driven a B-Spec car before, that doesn't quite have 500 horsepower.
Doesn't have 50 horsepower.
Yeah, exactly. They all require different techniques. And to me, it's kind of like you just switch from one thing to the other. It's really very natural. It's not a problem.
How much has the racecraft that you've been able to pick up on because of Spec Miata help you in the T3 car?
It's helped quite a bit, actually. We don't bump draft in the T3 car because it would shatter the front bumper on that car. But it is something where, really being sharp, and, if you're able to run at the front of a Spec Miata field, you can run at the front of just about any field within SCCA or within a pro race, in my opinion. The top drivers are extremely talented, and they prove it by going out and, running in these pro races. So I think it keeps the edges sharp. And then, I do think that not all the touring car drivers are racing in series that are as competitive as that. And so, they may not be as used to running door to door, an inch away the entire way around the track, lap after lap after lap.
Right.
So I think it is an advantage.
Definitely. All right, here's the time. Thank you, obviously, for being with me and walking us through the touring classes and talking about VIR. This is your opportunity to say thank you to the folks that help you go racing every weekend.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Brian, for having me on. First of all, this was a great conversation. I don't know how it's taken us this long to get together, but I'm glad we did. There are a lot of people, my family, who supports me while I do this. My dad, who got me into it. I mentioned earlier Claude Saffer and Jim Frank, who helped me out quite a bit with my cars, Claude engineering it and helping keep me straight and my head on straight. And Jim does a lot of work on keeping the car running. Jim Drago from East Street Racing from Miata has basically taken my Miata program and taken it to the new level. He got me on the podium in 2020 with one of his cars, the first year I switched into it. And he's been just a great supporter of mine. Think about some of the manufacturers as well. Nissan has helped quite a bit. Mazda, thank you to them. They've helped me over the years. Hoosier Tire, Tim Gilvin and the crew there at Hoosier could not do it without them. They make the best tire, and they continue developing it so it stays the best. So they've been just huge supporters in terms of the product and technical data, et cetera. Danny Pushkar at G-Lock Brakes, they've been amazing as well.
Awesome.
And there are probably a whole host of other people who I should thank but can't thank. They're just they're too many. It's really kind of takes a village to have a competitive effort and do this consistently for years.
Yeah, it does. It does. When I go through at the end of the Super Tour coverage and thank the workers and all the specialties, I always forget one specialty, and then they're always mad at me. So I get it. So, Rob, thanks a bunch. Good luck at VIR. Safe travels back and forth. And I will not be at VIR. Greg will be there, and I'll be doing it remote from home. But we will definitely cross paths in the next couple of months, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me on. And I'm sure we'll see each other live somewhere, but I definitely will see Greg. There's no avoiding him at the track. So
it's hard.
Looking good.
Yeah, it's hard to not find Greg somewhere at the racetrack. So, all right, that's going to do it for another episode of Inside the SCCA, presented by RacingWire.com. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe to the Racing Wire Podcast Network and the Racing Network on YouTube. Also, it would be great if you would like and subscribe and all that other fun stuff. We'd appreciate that as well. Leave a comment, especially if it's a good one. Follow us on social media. You can find me on Twitter at RaceAnnouncer. There's a new Inside the SCCA every week. I'm Brian Bielanski. Have yourself a fantastic weekend. Stay safe and go play with cars.